Hello, everybody, and welcome in to this special edition of the Couch GMs podcast on Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the one and only draft expert and saying goodbye to Aaron Rodgers expert, Cody Roadcap. I know I probably just spoiled the beginning of the show here, but Cody, how are you feeling? Mixed emotions, I'm sure.
Yeah, let's mixed emotions is good. First off, thanks for checking out this bonus episode. We've been telling you that they were coming, and now they're here. And of course, Aaron Rodgers being traded to the Jets is a big reason why we're doing this one. But we also have a fun mock draft for the draft coming up on Thursday. If you've been a listener for a while, you know that I'm a huge Aaron Rodgers fan. But I have been preparing for this for the last 2 seasons, and it's now here. So bittersweet is how I'll put it.
Bittersweet for sure. We're going to talk about that. And of course, yes, do a mock draft. Tyler will not be with us on this episode. Keep an eye out for him coming back next week. He is still hungover from his honeymoon. Not really, but kind of. But make sure you join our discussion on our social media channels. You can find us everywhere at the Couch GMs, and you can join our Discord to talk to us anytime, especially during the NFL draft, where we'll give you some live reactions to what happens. Cody, why don't we, as always, sit back, relax, and chat? I see Cody's dog wants to chat here as well. Probably has a lot to say about somebody that they've seen in that household for a long time. Aaron Rodgers officially finally traded to the New York Jets. Seemed like it picked up very fast where we heard on Monday morning that they were reopening trade negotiations, the Jets and the Packers were. And then by Monday evening, we hear the story that Aaron Rodgers has been traded. I'll try to give you a little rundown of what the pick compensation was. It was a little confusing, and then I'll let Cody go on his little tangent, I guess, about Aaron Rodgers. Jets do get Aaron Rodgers. They swap back 2 picks in the first round this year, so they'll get pick number 15 in the first round, and they get a 5th round pick this year. So in return, they give away pick 13, like I said. They give away a 2nd round pick this year, which is number 42. A 6th round pick this year, so it ends up being a pick swap where they move down around in the later rounds this year. And then there's a conditional pick in next year's draft. It is a 2nd round pick for sure that will become a 1st round pick if Aaron Rodgers plays 65% of the plays. I believe that's in 2023. But I think that's them just hoping that they're going to get more out of him if he comes back for another year. I'm actually kind of shocked that it's not contingent on the fact that he's going to play 2 years instead of 1.
I know that was a big talking point. And before we get into breaking down the trade, as a Packers fan, I just want to say thanks to Aaron Rodgers. If you ever stumble along the Couch Jams podcast, you are a big reason on why I'm a fan of the NFL. Yes, Brett Favre was quarterback when I started watching football, but Aaron Rodgers has been there, the starter, for 15 years. I'm only 28, so that was when I was 13 years old, just getting into football. So much appreciated him. Looking forward to seeing your name added to the side of Lambeau Field, being a part of the Packers Hall of Fame, going into the Hall of Fame as a Green Bay Packer. But we're going to talk about 2023 as him being a New York Jet, which he will be wearing number 8, not number 12. So that'll be a little bit different to getting used to. But George hit on it. This trade is, when you think back to when we started this at the beginning of this offseason, last offseason, the Jets seem to be the only suitor. They're bidding against themselves. Jets fans were telling us we only had to give up a 3rd round pick. Packers fans said we're getting the 1st, 2 seconds. And at the end of the day, they met somewhere in the middle. And honestly, maybe it's my bias, and I'll let you be the ultimate decider. I feel like the Packers won this trade. Yes, trading Aaron Rodgers, a Hall of Fame quarterback, is not an easy decision, but we got to the point where he wasn't going to play for the Green Bay Packers. He was going to cost $60 million bonus coming in September. And the Packers were still able to get a 1st round pick swap, moves up 2 spots in the 1st round. Nothing crazy. A 2nd round pick this year, pick 42. The Jets still have pick 43 from the Elijah Moore pick swap they did. And then the 2nd round pick that becomes a 1st if Rodgers plays 65% of the plays, which basically is saying if Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a catastrophic injury in the first half of the season, it's a first round pick. They're betting on if he plays, even if it's only for 1 year, that he gets it's a low end, first round pick. And if he doesn't, it's a high end second round pick. So the value is fairly similar. But not having any conditions that what's going to happen next year, not having any conditions on based on how well the Jets do. It's not he plays 65% and they make playoffs. It's just 65% of plays. And what that means, the Jets could go 8-9 and miss the playoffs and be sitting at pick 15 next year. But if he plays 9+ games, the Packers will have their first round pick. So I think it's for the Packers. What is your thoughts?
My thoughts are nobody learned from the Carson Wentz trade. That's my first thought. Not only say that because of the second round pick becomes a first. That was a third round pick becomes a first with a certain percentage of plays, and that did not work out well at all for the Colts. But no, I think that I'm actually shocked that the compensation was as high as it was when it came down to it. And you and I have been alluding to it for a few weeks now, where the Jets were bidding against themselves, and there was no rush, and the Packers were like, we keep him as a backup or we get something out of him. And when you look at that was basically the options, the fact that they got 2 second-round picks at the least and then swapped up 2 picks as well in the first round this year is actually crazy value for when you're considering that they already have his replacement. If they didn't already have Jordan Love on the roster and weren't already looking to, if they were looking to replace Rodgers with somebody else that hasn't been on the roster yet, it may not seem like as much of a win. When you're looking at the fact that they already have their supposed future of the position, and I think there's a good chance that Jordan Love can be that guy, already locked up, then I think that this is an absolute steal. And anything that the Packers get out of Aaron Rodgers in this, on top of the how many years he's played for him, the Super Bowl championship they got, is just lucky, in my opinion. And they fleeced the Jets when you look at it that way.
All right, so I'm not alone. I think it is a fleece too. And I'm going to relate this to something. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Fame player, so anytime you're dealing with him, it gets complicated.
Yep.
But if you remember last year, back around this time, about a week or so before the draft, the Eagles and the Saints made an odd trade where the Saints moved up a couple picks, but they gave up a future first-round pick, and people are like, what's going on? And basically what was happening was the Eagles were protecting themselves. They were saying this year is 100% Jalen Hurts' team.
Yep.
But if things don't go right, we're going to have first-round picks there that we can move around the board. On the surface, this looks like the Packers will have 2 first-round picks next year. Yep. If Jordan Love doesn't work out, they've also turned Aaron Rodgers into an extra insurance plan for next season. As a Packers fan, I hope Jordan Love works out. But I think, that's kind of a big takeaway. So, and to keep those conditions to so little, it's such a high likelihood that he gets the first round pick, or at least it's a high second round pick if it doesn't. Like, great on that's to me is like where the fleecing really happened, is not so much, the pick swap. Yeah, that's great. The second round pick, awesome. You love an extra top 50 pick, but getting a first round pick next year out of Aaron Rodgers, where the Jets could be very much in a situation where they don't have a first round pick or Aaron Rodgers next year.
Yep.
Like he was 90%. He himself said it was 90-10 on retirement after this season. Like that's a bold move for the Jets. If it pays off at the Super Bowl, like the San Francisco, or not the San Francisco, they wish it would. The Los Angeles Rams did with Matt Stafford. It's totally worth it.
Oh, man. But they still got multiple years out of Matt Stafford. And that's not guaranteed with Aaron Rodgers.
Well,
I mean, it didn't work out because of the injury, but the fact is, like, Matt Stafford was still playing this past year and is still expected to play this year.
Right.
So, yeah, they got their Super Bowl, but they've got more in the future that then is locked up for Aaron Rodgers.
But if the Jets win a Super Bowl, it's worth it no matter what. For that,
100%.
For that team. Like, it's worth it even if he only plays 1 year. And it'd be cool to see him right out on top unless he plays the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl, which I will say this right now, and my wife, you're listening. If in 2023, Jordan Love and the Packers meet Aaron Rodgers and the Jets in the Super Bowl, we're going. What's it in Vegas this year?
I believe it is Vegas. Yeah, so it's even a
We're
perfect
going.
time to go out there.
We're going back to Vegas, and we're going to the Super Bowl. Screw getting a house.
Nice. So just before we move on, I want to build what I think should have been the condition to move this from a second to a first round pick. Or honestly, in my opinion, I think it would have been fair to say a third round pick that could move to a first round pick. And that would have had been if the Jets make the AFC Championship game or beyond. So make it to the AFC Championship, win the AFC, or win the Super Bowl. Or if Aaron Rodgers commits to playing in 2024 by draft day.
So I get what you're saying. I don't think it could have been the AFC Championship game. I think the playoffs would have had to be the line, just
Gotcha.
because there's so many, things once you get into the playoffs at any given Sunday. It's not series.
Mhm.
But I actually thought, and there was reports that the Packers were willing to, at one point during negotiations, now how true these reports were, willing to send back a 2025 pick if Rodgers didn't play in 2024. So
see, that would have been another option, because I just find it hard to believe that the Jets are willing to give up a 2 and a 1 for one season. And yeah, there's a good chance that this young team could come around, a veteran, and they could make a strong run, but it's one guaranteed season. And that's just what I can't get over.
yeah, I'm saying unless they talk to Rodgers and he's like, guys, I got you. This is a 2-year commitment. I'm on board for 2 minutes. Tom Pelissero did say that this deal won't actually go through for a couple days. They're expecting it to be done before Thursday night, but it'll probably be a couple days because Rodgers is actually going to rework his contract. Now, it was phrased to help the Packers with the salary cap, but I do remember that there was some talks about so maybe Green Bay is actually taking on more salary cap. We'll have to wait and see for the final details, which could be a reason why the cost went a little bit higher. Might balance it out a little bit to help with the cap situation. But I'm with you. Like the lack of commitment from Rodgers, even if he says it's 2 years, to hear a guy say, 2 months ago, I was 90-10, and then be like, I'm all in for 2 more seasons, boys. Like, it's definitely a little sketchy. Again, not a knock on Aaron Rodgers, but was time for the Packers to move on. And the other part has to be hard for Jets fans out there. And if you're a Jets fan, let us know in the comments or connect with us on Discord. Like, how does it feel to from your perspective, you have to feel like you were negotiating against yourself.
Yep.
And you still had to give up this much. There's definitely some caveats we won't know behind the scenes. Maybe the Jets overplayed their hand, what went on with it. But 2023 football is definitely going to be weird with Aaron Rodgers still in green, but green and white, or green, white, and black, whatever their secondary color is, playing in New York, wearing number 8, no longer AR-12. AR-8 just doesn't sound right. And Jets fans at least know you will have your first Sunday night football game in over a decade.
Yes, there's no doubt about that one now, and all the hype that's going to come around Aaron Rodgers, and we'll see how well it works for them. But you mentioned that this season's going to be crazy. I think this draft is going to be absolutely crazy too. So why don't we get a little inside the mind of our draft expert and do our first round mock draft?
All right, George, I think you need to lay off on the draft expert. I'm just a draft enthusiast. I don't need the pressure of expert.
You're an expert. It's fine.
I'm an expert of the 3 of us. We'll just put it that way.
You're an expert. Got it.
Awesome. So hashtag expert of the NFL draft, which actually no one is. No one actually is. It's just a big guessing game. We don't really know how these players are going to pan out. We don't know how teams view these players. We see players fall that we don't understand why, like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, formerly of the Eagles, now the Detroit Lions. He was supposed to be a first-round pick, fell all the way to the 3rd round for the Saints, then got traded. That's just one of many. Aaron Rodgers, he was supposed to be the 1st overall pick, and when Alex Smith, he all the way into the mid-20s. So players fall, things get crazy, and draft week is just as crazy with all the rumors and speculations. I had a mock draft pretty much prepared, then the Aaron Rodgers trade, then I did some more digging in, and now Texans might be out on a quarterback. But I've put together the Couch GM's official mock draft. George and I are going to go through it. We'll go pick by pick. I won't spend too much time on each individual pick unless there's some interesting trades. There is some trades in this one, and this is more of a predictive mock on what I think may actually happen, not what I would do, just based on the latest news, notes. And just remember, though, when you are listening, this is anonymous source season. So many people come out and say, like, this guy's a bad teammate, and it's just
this guy's got a bad grade on a test, because that's the one I've heard most recently. I'm interested to see what happens with that one. I'm going to leave the player to when we talk about him.
For sure. But let's jump into it. So as you remember, earlier in the offseason, the Chicago Bears traded the number 1 pick to the Carolina Panthers. And again, this is predictive because if it wasn't, I would still take CJ Stroud. He's my favorite quarterback in the class, but that is not the way it seems to be going here. And Bryce Young seems to be the consensus number 1 guy, the top quarterback. People are not worried about his size. I do like that they've called him the Steph Curry with a football, and Steph Curry is one of my favorite basketball players. So definitely excited. I think he'll be fun. Carolina, Bryce Young to Carolina seems pretty much locked in stone at this point, barring a surprise draft day twist, change, something out of left field and right field at the same time. Bryce Young will be a Carolina Panther.
I agree. I think the only way that does not happen is if we see that they traded up to number 1, maybe they trade back. But I don't know who exactly they would trade back with, knowing that number 2 is kind of up in the air on position. So I'm interested to see where you go there. I'll just let you go to it.
Awesome. So number 2 is up, and it's the Houston Texans. And I debated this because we've started to hear the rumblings. Do I trade down with them? Do I take another quarterback? I mean, heck, there is a lot of rumblings that the Minnesota Vikings are making calls to the Texans and the Cardinals. They're at pick 23. Could I justify the Houston Texans going all the way back down to pick 23 from pick 2? Like, how much of a haul would that have to be to move 21 spots?
Has Minnesota, to be a lot, knowing
Minnesota,
history.
If you want to do that for Will Levis, please go ahead and do it. Please. I didn't do it. I couldn't figure out a deal to make that work. But I did follow the smoke, and the smoke is that they're not sold on a quarterback. So I have them taking Will Anderson Jr., the consensus best defensive player, with no baggage in the draft. And I did that with a little bit in mind of DeMeco Ryans as new head coach, defensive minded, gets his defensive star, gets Will Anderson. Wasn't a deal that comes together that they could really make work, just because nobody wanted to move up there because they all this smoke out there. Maybe they do take a quarterback. Again, I would still take CJ Stroud here at this position, but he, as George alluded to, apparently scored really bad on a test and now has potential to fall out of the top 7. And it's also worth noting, Will Levis went from plus 2,000 to being the second pick to like minus 120, roughly. Those are kind of those numbers on Saturday.
Oh my
God. So I don't know what Vegas
God.
knows, and I didn't reflect that in pick, but that is something to keep in mind.
That's funny because you say that. Normally Vegas has has insider knowledge on a lot of those things, but I've heard a lot of things that say Will Anderson's going to go pick 2 now. And it's not a bad idea for Houston to get who could be the consensus best player in the draft that's at least non-quarterback. Because they still pick later, currently at pick 12, unless Cody has them moving around the board again. But another team that I've heard whispers of moving down, especially if Houston doesn't take a quarterback, is 3 in Arizona. Does Arizona keep a pick?
They do not.
Okay.
They have Kyler Murray, and this is if Houston doesn't go for a quarterback, which I don't have them currently taking, pick 3 becomes wild on the draft night. What will people get?
Hot commodity.
I went like, do the Colts just sell out to move up 1 spot, a la the Chicago Bears trading 1 spot up to get Mitch Trubisky? Does somebody out jump them? And in this instance, I had the Las Vegas Raiders trading up from pick 7 to pick 3. So they move up 4 spots. They still give up a first round pick next year, some other things. But they move up pick 3 and they take Anthony Richardson.
Anthony Richardson.
Yes. So I know Will Levis.
Oh,
I know Will Levis has been the hot commodity. I just can't do it. And they have Jimmy G. So Richardson needs a year to sit. They go up and get what they feel is the second best quarterback in this class, or maybe they feel he's even better than Bryce Young, the highest upside. They go up and get Anthony Richardson. George, I think I'm talking George into this. He really likes this. They have Jimmy G for a year. Let him groom, sit behind that. And they have a young guy. And if Jimmy G gets injured, which he's prone to do, unfortunately, or, they start out rough, they bring him in and he plays like Justin Fields did last year. Still has some questions about throwing ability, but athlete, gifted, lots of fun. Biggest surprise of the draft, Anthony Richards 3 to the Las Vegas Raiders.
yeah. I don't know if you're talking me into it or if I'm still just in shock because I heard Anthony Richardson's name at pick 3 and at number 2 quarterback off the board. Like, I've been in the mindset where, like, yeah, he could go 5th off the board at quarterback. Somewhere in the teens, someone might move up somewhere in the middle of the first round. He might even fall to the back half of the first round. I mean, there was a lot of combine hype, and he is a very raw talent. And they say that, like, you can groom a quarterback's intangible. Like, his physical traits you can't change, but you can groom him into a quarterback in other ways. And having Jimmy Garoppolo there is big, but they're not even the first team I would have thought of going up to take a quarterback. Like, I could have seen Seattle moving up a couple spots. I could have seen Indy flipping up one spot. Heck, I could have seen Tennessee moving up even further. But it does make sense for Vegas to go out there and get a quarterback.
And I do think all those teams that you mentioned made the most sense or made sense to go up there. I think Vegas is right in there. I just went Vegas, a little bit different than what a lot of people are. Just something I was thinking about. So could it be Tennessee? That's a lot to get up from 11 to 3. It's also, the same with Atlanta was at 8, so it's one pick better. Seattle's 5. I mean, they might have been able to save a first round pick if they would get up their pick in the 20s, but we'll have to wait and see what Seattle does. Pick 4, I think the Colts stay at pick 4. They also take a quarterback. This one still might be a surprise based on how I've talked all offseason. Maybe I'm paying too much attention to the recent reports, but it's Will Levis. So Will Levis goes pick 4. He posted a video of him hitting the crossbar on his knees from 50 yards out.
Nice.
So that's cool. So Colts get him. Prototypical
Welcome
size,
to the
strong
TikTok
arm.
era of the NFL, where these quarterback prospects are like trying to throw trick shots on the internet to try to raise their draft stock.
Hey, whatever it takes, man, whatever it takes. But yeah, the Colts get Will Levis, the prototypical size, the guy that has the strongest arm in the class. Shane Steichen, he has some rushing ability for his size. Gets to work with them. He's helped groom now Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts. So if anybody can get the most out of him, it seems like they have the coach in place. Again, he's not my favorite quarterback in the class, but it seems like the league and people that talk about the league for actual living are higher on him than me. So that is Will Levis, pick 4.
I'm very interested to see how far CJ Stroud falls because I know we've now talked about a couple of different teams coming up that we're looking at potentially taking a quarterback. The fact that he was a potential number 1 pick, have heard some kind of sketchy things about his football knowledge. And now we're at pick 5. Seattle has a quarterback in place, but it's really kind of a, bridge quarterback. Are they going to take CJ Stroud since he fell this far? Is it too tempting?
It's still too tempting. They're going to take arguably the best player in the class. I know he has the baggage. I know he's very polarizing, they'll take Jalen Carter, get obviously one of the top players, bolster that defensive line, have a quarterback in place that they just paid. I mean, we've already had 3 quarterbacks gone. Yet I might think CJ Stroud's, the top, if not one, 1A, 1B type of guy. But people seem to think he's going to fall for a little bit, and maybe that's just, pre-draft jitters. But I'll let him slide, not too much longer, but I'll let him slide a little bit long, a little tease when he might be coming up. But the Seattle Seahawks, they get Jalen Carter here, one of the best players, if not the best player. Hopefully the off-the-field stuff can get cleaned up, and that's who the Seahawks get. So just to recap, picks 1 through 5 so far, we got Bryce Young to the Carolina Panthers, Will Anderson to the Houston Texans, Raiders trading up for Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, QB4, or pick 4, QB3, pick 4 to the Indianapolis Colts, and Jalen Carter, pick 5 to the Seattle Seahawks, who would have been the Denver Broncos pick in the Russell Wilson trade. So that's another piece that they got to that. So real quick thoughts on the top 5.
Interesting top 5. I like your boldness going out there with getting Richardson in there. I think there's a real good chance that Stroud falls out of the top 5 and maybe even further. So I think that's a good move. Jalen Carter, since I didn't get a chance to talk about it yet, 5 might be rich for him too, because there's a lot of baggage. And I've seen less baggage make people fall out of the first round, let alone fall to pick 5. And I feel like there's only one team that I see super confidently taking him if he falls that far. And I would say that's pick 9 to Chicago. They've been doing a lot of homework on Jalen Carter. So I feel like if he doesn't go 2 or 3, like we were kind of seeing how he was going pre-draft process, I expect him to go 9 or fall way down. So 5 would be very interesting, yet possible.
It is worth noting that Peter Schrager, who has a pretty good insight with the NFL track record, did come out today and put out his top 5 things for the draft, and one of them was Jalen Carter doesn't make it out of the top 6. So I don't know if that's just because his baggage happened at the combine. It's not a Laramie Tunsil situation where the video of him in a mask comes out 10 minutes before the draft and people panic. They've had some time to do some research. It was very interesting. Carter did not do any visits with teams outside of the top 10. So whether that was just no, I'm worth it, or we'll have to wait and see. I did think if they didn't go Carter there, I think they'll overcome it and do him. I do think Tyree Wilson is in play for the Seattle Seahawks as well, the edge rusher out of Texas Tech. Despite him being in play at 5, he does not go to 6. The Detroit Lions take Devin Witherspoon, the cornerback out of Illinois. This has been mocked, them taking cornerback has been mocked for them for pretty much since the end of the season. They did trade Jeff Okudah, their former number 3 overall pick. They did add guys like Cam Sutton in free agency, but those aren't they're good stopgap players, but they're not guys they're going to build around for the future. Maybe they pan out to be, but they get Devin Witherspoon. He is cornerback 1A or 1B pretty much everywhere. An elite athlete, guy likes to hit, fun player, solid technique. Illinois doesn't sound like this, the best if you're not as familiar with college football, but they had a really solid defense last year. So Devin Witherspoon to Detroit makes a ton of sense.
Especially since the Jeff Okudah trade, I am not shocked at all. You have them taking a corner. If they take a corner in general, it could be him or Christian Gonzalez, I believe is the 1B that you're talking about. I wouldn't be shocked on either of them, but I would also think Witherspoon's the pick there. And that's probably, besides maybe pick 1 in this draft, the one pick I'm the most confident in this entire draft.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced a corner is going 6 to the Lions, unless they trade up.
Yeah.
They were in consideration for my blockbuster trade to trade up to get Anthony Richardson. Maybe if he falls too, because they have Jared Goff, another team that has I could see them get a little interested because they're a team expected to compete, not be up this high. So if they can get a quarterback to sit behind Jared Goff, I would put it past them. But corner seems like the most logical thing. I mentioned Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech, edge rusher. Some people have had him jump over Will Anderson as of late. very reminiscent of Trayvon Walker passing Aiden Hutchinson last year. The last minute, Walker ended up going 1. I don't think Tyree Wilson will pass Will Anderson, but he goes pick 7 to the Arizona Cardinals, who still get a top 3 defender in this class, edge rusher in position of need. I mean, the Cardinals need a lot of people. Let's be wrong. I think they're also a trade back candidate again.
Double trade back, just try to pick up a bunch of top picks or higher end picks
if they wanted to. But I think Tyree Wilson is good enough of a prospect at a premium position that it wasn't worth the trade down. We're running out of those true blue chip players in the draft. We're getting into some of those like high upside, but also low floor, like definitely those kind of picks there at pick 7 with Tyree Wilson. Probably one. I
definitely could see if it's less quarterback heavy than even you're saying, and you didn't have it like super. I mean, I was fairly quarterback heavy. 4 quarterbacks in the top 5. Did you have there? Am I not mistaken?
3.
No, 3 in the top 5. So it's still pretty quarterback heavy. But if it's even less so, I think there's a good chance that Arizona double trades down. If they do trade 3 to 7, they would drop further because those blue chip players would be more gone. They're going to try to bring in more shots at getting top talent in the mid to late first round. So I could see that. But if it falls this way, I think that's about where they would go.
All right. And you mentioned fall, and the fall is going to end at pick 8. CJ Stroud is going off the clock, but it is not to the Atlanta Falcons. I have them trading back to pick 12, and the Houston Texans coming up from pick 12, and they are now leaving the first round with Will Anderson at pick 2 and CJ Stroud at pick 8.
Any Texans fans out there would be absolutely elated if they could pull that off, considering the fact that they were so many talks up to this week that they were going to take CJ Stroud at 2. If they could get their choice at any non-quarterback in the draft and then still get him later in the first round, that'd be an absolute steal considering how it looked 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, this is very much a draft day scenario trade. If you haven't seen that movie, it's not the best movie. It's not an Academy Award winning, but it's a football movie. So if you're a football fan, you should definitely check it out. Yeah, I think it was very tough for me to actually trade back from Atlanta and not have Atlanta take CJ Stroud. But they just took Ritter, which they seem to like. They have at least a year, I think, into him. Trade back, get some extra picks. Very similar, see what happens. And then if they're in this position next year, go for a quarterback. So again, that was just Houston's trading back or trading up to 8, Falcons going back to 12. Houston gets their quarterback. The Chicago Bears, who went from 1 to 9 early in the offseason, they get Paris Johnson Jr., the tackle out of Ohio State, the top tackle in the class. Yes, there is a lot of buzz around them going with Jackson Smith and Jigba. There's people want them to get, more weapons for Justin Fields. And I understand that, but you just traded for DJ Moore and Claypool. You still have Darnell Mooney. Like, wide receiver seems way too rich at this spot for the Chicago Bears. Essentially, you would be giving up the first pick of the second round and the first pick of the first round for DJ Moore and another rookie wide receiver. Yes, there's some other stuff involved, but that's a lot for wide receiver. And they desperately need offensive line help, so they get the best tackle in the class. And then to round out the top 10, Georgia's Philadelphia Eagles. I know there has been some reports that they are making a late round look into Jackson Smith and Jigba, which I think would be a great fit for them. There was also some rumblings throughout the weekend that AJ Brown has been recruiting Derrick Henry to the Eagles in a trade. I don't know how they would afford Derrick Henry, so they're just going to get a young guy with their
cap hit's not that big, actually. $6.5 million.
Yeah, but they got a lot to do. I mean, they just gave Jalen Hurts all that money.
Exactly.
And don't get me wrong, you line up a Q sneak that they didn't ban with Derrick Henry pushing Jalen Hurts. Good luck. If there's a draft day trade, I'm gonna let everyone know, draft day trade of Derrick Henry to the Eagles and the Titans, and they do some pick swap or something like that. Like if it's their first round pick swap and maybe like a third round pick or something for Derrick Henry, like Tyler is never going to record a podcast with us again. So just be aware that if that happens. But besides the fact they don't go the wide receiver option, I mean, they've taken wide receivers, two of the last 3 years.
3. Yeah.
And then they traded their first round pick last year for a wide receiver. So
Yeah.
eventually they got to draft a different position. So I didn't have them taking Jackson Smith and Jigba. I had them taking Bijan Robinson. I talked about it on the last podcast. They have the luxury with the extra pick. This is the New Orleans Saints pick. They are the one team that could take a running back early. And there are a lot of reports that the league is a lot higher on some of these running backs, that it's not just Bijan Robinson that might go in the first round.
That'd be different considering how the league has been going away from the running back position in the first round. I'm not shocked that you had them taking Bijan Robinson once you had Paris Johnson going pick 9. I 100% think the Eagles' first choice is Paris Johnson, and he's going to play guard until they have an opening at tackle. Which I mean might be a waste when you consider that he is the best tackle prospect in the draft and they're going to move him inside. But knowing how much that team values the offensive line, I wouldn't be shocked. If that's gone, I wouldn't be shocked if they're like, okay, this is the rich get richer scenario of take Bijan Robinson to add to that team.
Yeah, and I will say if the Eagles are really looking for a guy, because they're locked up on the tackles, look, Peter Skoronski, he's listed as a tackle. He does have short arms, which that's a knock in the NFL for playing tackle, but he's super athletic, would transition into guard. He would play really well on the interior of the Eagles as well. So Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern could be the Eagles pick, but he's not. He's the Titans pick at pick 11.
We need offensive line help as well.
They need offensive line help as well. They need wide receiver help. Jackson Smith and Jigba was in consideration here as well, but this guy, Rick Carthen from San Francisco, seems like he's almost committing to the full rebuild. There's reports that Ryan Tannehill might get moved, and if he does, they might pick up some extra picks day 2 or day 3. For him, I don't expect him to go for a first-round pick, but just start from the ground up, and the best way to build your team is through the interior, both the offense and defensive line. So they get Peter Skoronski, who is some people's best offensive lineman in the class. Pick 12, the Atlanta Falcons are now on the clock. And this has been the offseason of Atlanta bolstering this defense. They got Calais Campbell, who picked the Falcons over the Jets, which is an interesting decision. They went out and paid big money to Jesse Bates, and they still get the guy at pick 12 after my trade that they probably would have taken at pick 8 if they didn't go quarterback, and that is cornerback Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon, getting one of the top players in the class. And honestly, I think Atlanta, they picked up some extra draft capital this year, next year, depending on whatever the trade worked out to be. But I do think getting Christian Gonzalez at 12 is an incredible value for the Atlanta Falcons.
I'm with you there, and that's a great pick. The fact that they could pick something else up and still go get someone to bolster that defense. I think they're in on Desmond Ridder, so I like the fact that you didn't have him taking a quarterback. And then they're going to address that position next year if it happens that Desmond Ridder doesn't work out.
All right, so pick 13. The pick the Packers just got from the New York Jets. And what do they do?
2 picks higher than they were
2
before.
picks higher. They trade with the New York Jets. I'm just kidding. Honestly, that would be hilarious if the Jets trade back up with them to back pick 13. I would probably lose it on draft night. But I do have the Packers trading it. I don't know if it's just, this pick is forever tied to Aaron Rodgers. Do we like to maybe spread
to distance it a little?
And they actually drop back pretty far. They drop all the way back to 22. So they're going to get a decent return, maybe even a first-round pick next year.
To Baltimore. Okay. Can I guess? Is this Jackson Smith and Jigba?
Yes, because this is also the most Packers thing for me as a fan. The guy I want desperately goes in our spot that we traded back for. So the Falcons, they get OBJ, or not the Falcons, the Ravens, they get OBJ. They have Rashad Bateman still. They add Jackson Smith and Jigba. They're like, Lamar, look at all these weapons. And they signed him to a long-term deal. And this offense goes from no receivers to top-end receivers. And we're not relying on Devin Duvernay to be our wide receiver 1 heading into 2023. So
yeah,
typically it's the Ravens trading down in the drafts. this year they trade up and they get the best wide receiver in the draft class, and all the Packers fans are sad that it went in their pick.
Now, a lot of people are writing off the Ravens because of the whole, are they going to keep Lamar? They haven't had wide receivers. There's a lot of powerhouse teams in the AFC. That defense is still legit. If they were to be able to bring back Lamar and get Jackson Smith and Jigba with OBJ there as well, they're immediately a powerhouse contender team in the AFC that people were writing off 2 weeks ago.
For sure. And that's what makes the whole Aaron Rodgers thing interesting. Like, the AFC is no cakewalk. Like, that's why, like, not even having, like, making the playoffs as a condition, because there's 3 teams in their division. There's 3 teams in the AFC North. If the Ravens keep Lamar, there's at least 2 teams in the Chargers and the Chiefs in the AFC West. Maybe a third one prevails out of Las Vegas or Denver. AFC South, yeah, they're struggling. They're a bit behind, but that's one division. They're all aside, so it's gonna be a tough walk in there. So those are pick 13s, and that's kind of where I don't have any more big trades or anything like that. That was my last big trade of the draft. I'll talk about some spots I think teams can move around. And because we're starting to go a little bit long, I'm going to start going a couple picks at a time, just to help with some pacing. The New England Patriots at pick 14 take Broderick Jones, the tackle out of Georgia.
Any thought of quarterback there?
There was a thought of quarterback, but I think they'll let Mac Jones go one more year.
Okay. Sorry, cut you off there.
No, that's fine. I appreciate it. Cut me off anytime I'm talking about player if you have a thought. And maybe a hot take. If the Patriots fail this year, they're looking for a new quarterback and a new head coach next year.
The Belichick era could be ending.
Belichick replaces Saleh on the Jets again. No, I'm just kidding. That's too crazy.
Okay, now we're going off track.
Or maybe he goes to the Dolphins with Tom Brady coming out of retirement. We'll have to wait and see on that one.
Wouldn't that be something? Okay, continue.
All right, but speaking of the New York Jets, at pick 15, they get tackle Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. They need offensive line help as well. He'll slot right in at right tackle. They have some pieces, but they still need to pull that line for their 39-year-old quarterback. The Washington Commanders at pick 16. This was one of the toughest picks for me to decide on, because I don't really know where they were going to go. I thought about reaching out to Marcus and being like, hey, you got any insight? I didn't, because I didn't want to be unfair for that one. So I went with cornerback Joey Porter Jr. Out of Penn State. He was just the best player, I think, available left on the board. And a cornerback is a premium position. So went with them. The other guy I was debating with them was at pick 17. I had the Steelers taking Nolan Smith. I think he'll be a nice complement at edge rusher to TJ Watt. They're both a little bit on the leaner slot side, so not as more of a pass rush specialist, but they were able to help TJ Watt grow into a better run defender. He's still not like the top end. He doesn't have to be, because he's an elite pass rusher. I thought Nolan Smith could go to the Commanders, but I had them taking Porter and Smith going to the Steelers. Any thoughts about either of those guys?
I think Porter was the best guy available left on the board there, so I think that was a good move for Washington. I've seen Nolan Smith in some mocks go as high as pick 8. So if he falls into the right scheme, he could be an absolute star. And Pittsburgh is a great example of the right scheme because of everything you said with TJ Watt and how they have their 3-4 defense. And Pittsburgh's another team that's been quietly improving in a lot of ways, and that would be a good way for them to solidify their future and still have a shot to make a run at a tough AFC.
For sure. All right, so pick 18, 19, and pick 20, I think is a very interesting spot for all these guys. I think this is where the Hendon Hooker range comes into play. Does the Lions want to take Hendon Hooker? Does the Buccaneers want to take Hendon Hooker? Do the Seattle Seahawks want to take Hendon Hooker? And while I think any of these 3 teams can and will, one of them probably will, if someone doesn't trade up and jump them, like the Steelers could be a trade back candidate for someone to jump up and get a Hendon Hooker.
Mm-hmm.
But I still had the Lions taking Jordan Addison, the wide receiver out of USC. They passed on him. They like Jared Cook enough. They get one more weapon. We'll be interested to see. He is a smaller guy, so he plays a lot of slot. So does Amon St. Brown, but maybe their USC connection to learn how to play on the field together. So Jordan Addison out of USC went to Detroit. They get another pass catching option. So just a reminder, they had Devin Witherspoon at pick 6 and Jordan Addison at pick 18. So they had a pretty good first round. Then the Buccaneers, I debated giving them as well Hendon Hooker. I opted out of them, and I gave them Lucas Van Ness, a very young prospect that has a ton of upside as an edge rusher. One of those weird situations where he played more snaps than anybody in Iowa, but he wasn't actually technically a starter because they had seniors ahead of him. So they would start, but then he would come up and play, and he has a lot of tread left on his tires, a lot of left in the tank for him. So still a young prospect. Lucas Van Ness, again, another guy I've seen him go as high as 14, 10, 12. Like he's gone up there. So getting him at pick 19 felt too good of a value. That let pick 20 with the Seattle Seahawks, where they get Hendon Hooker, and Seahawks fans have to feel great if they get Jalen Carter and Hendon Hooker as they leave pick 20 in the first round.
Now, like Cody was saying, Washington or Pittsburgh could be a really big spot to trade down if one of those 3 teams wants to jump somebody else to go get someone like a Hendon Hooker, or if CJ Stroud falls as far as some of these people are trying to make it out to be. So there's a lot of fluidity in that part of the draft. I think if it does stay the same, that's a good way that could go. A lot of good prospects that are falling pretty far down there, like Cody was saying. So don't count out some of these names if you're some teams in the middle of the first round. And before you continue, Cody, just a reminder, the next pick is where Miami would be picking, but they forfeited their pick due to tampering issues this past season. So 31 picks in the first round, not 32. Miami would have been 21. Instead, 21 is the LA Chargers.
Yeah, and I think the Chargers can go a lot of different places here. They could go tight end. They're still, they haven't really ever found the guy to replace Antonio Gates. Evan Ingram had a solid enough season. It was not Evan Ingram. It was Gerald Everett. I'm so sorry. Gerald Everett yes. Had a solid enough season for them. I think that they'd be okay running it back. I thought about maybe giving them a wide receiver like a Zay Flowers, since Jordan Addison was already gone, because they've already was talked about this is potentially Keenan Allen's last year.
Yep.
Quentin Johnson is kind of similar to a Mike Williams in, a big guy but's more of a vertical threat. So he was also in play. But I know there's been some rumblings that he might drop. So I actually went, and maybe he was just the best player left on the board, the most interesting one. I went Deonte Banks, the cornerback out of Maryland. I do think a pass catcher was very much in play there. They are getting J.C. Jackson back. They have Derwin James. But just bolstering that secondary, Banks, Jackson, Asante Samuel Jr., and then throw in Derwin James. That's a tough secondary, and cornerbacks are becoming like edge rushers. You predominantly play with, you have 3 starters now anyway, so you can never have enough. So Deonte Banks went to the Chargers. Pick 22, this was the Baltimore Ravens pick, but if you remember, I traded all the way back with the Green Bay Packers, and the Green Bay Packers get tight end Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame.
I was about to make a smart comment about here comes the wide receiver run, but okay.
No.
I don't hate that move either.
They take a tight end here. Honestly, I would not be surprised if you don't trade back and take Mayer at 13. I like Dalton Kincaid better, but Michael Mayer seems to be the consensus number 1. So getting him a position of desperate need for the Packers, getting some extra asset. Michael Mayer at pick 22, great value. And then at pick 23, the Minnesota Vikings, which in real life, we're hoping they have traded this to go up to pick 2 for Will Levis. But they get defensive tackle Kalijah Cansey out of Pittsburgh, super athletic guy, has been
still no wide receiver love.
Dude, I'm not a huge fan of the wide receivers.
I know. I'm just seeing a bunch of teams in this section that are like wide receiver needy that I would
But
expect some of these guys to go in the end of the first round.
I think there's enough value in in round 2 and 3 at wide receiver
Okay.
that getting like better prospects might be worth it. The one thing I will say is remember the first round picks have the 5th-year option. And because of the price that wide receivers are currently going at, I wouldn't be surprised if, people used to trade back into the first round for a quarterback, if they don't
Yep.
start trading back in for a wide receiver to get that 5th option. But Kalijah Cansey, top defensive end in the class or defensive tackle in the class, has been compared to Aaron Donald. That might just because they went to the same school, but a little bit undersized, but super explosive. So the Vikings get that guy. Then at pick 24, the Jacksonville Jaguars get edge rusher Miles Murphy out of Clemson. Another good prospect. He is another high range guy. I've seen him go as high as 8 to Atlanta. And the Jacksonville Jaguars get him at pick 24. And it's not that he's falling. I think that just speaks to, like, there's a couple of guys that are elite in this class, but, like, the difference between pick 12 and pick 40 is very narrow this year. So I come draft day, we're going to see a lot of guys that be like, what? I haven't seen him in any mock draft, and he comes all the way up. And it just teams view people differently, and that's where we're at with players. So Miles Murphy at pick 24. Any thoughts?
No, I think also, yeah, like it's not only that I think pick 12 and pick 40 are very close, but there's like very few teams that I think you can point at and say, this is where they're going. Like you can point at Baltimore and say they're either going wide receiver or they might try to sell out and get a quarterback if they don't think the Lamar thing's going to work out. They're a little bit, I guess, crazy to think about when you think you don't know their quarterback situation, but there's very stable. Like there's 2-3 positions you could see them going for. Tampa Bay has a pretty strong defense still. They're probably going offensive line. They could take a quarterback. But then there's teams like the Vikings where I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably going to go wide receiver. And you have so many other things they could go with. Jacksonville, the same way. So it almost depends on like, oh, this edge rusher might fall because the teams near the top that want an edge rusher happen to like somebody else better, even though this guy is just as good of a talent. And then they just fall through the cracks because no one's looking for an edge rusher, for example.
Yeah, and like tight end is very deep in this class. Edge rusher has a lot of really good second round players. Like this is a pretty bad safety class. So like normally we see a couple safeties going early. Like a lot of safeties aren't going to be going until round 3 and later because some have super athletic traits, but didn't have good tape, and then some have good tape, but when they athletically tested, you're like, I don't know if they'll hold up in the NFL. So quarterbacks always get priority. So this draft is definitely a weird one, and expect a lot of craziness to happen. I did just talk about the poor safety class, but I did have Giants taking safety Brian Branch out of Alabama at pick 25.
Good with that. I'm kidding.
What'd you say?
I'm good with that. I was just trying to be smart. I'm kidding.
Because you're an Eagles fan? I mean,
yeah, no.
They got to cover. Look, they got to cover on the back end against A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. They got to cover on the back end against Terry McLaurin. They got to cover on the back end against C.D. Lamb and Brandon Cooks. So they get
they have a lot of wide receiver talent in that division. Yes.
Definitely wide receiver could be in play here. Would not be surprised if they went Zay Flowers here, Johnson, and why is his name slipping me? He's not even in my first round pick, but just again, Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss. Very, the best way to describe him is I don't want to compare him to Deebo Samuel, but like the guy that can line up anywhere, do a little bit of everything, can block pretty well, can run out of the backfield. He's a guy that's been getting some love as of late. And I think he'd be really fun with Brian Daboll, but I still went with Brian Branch. They get the best safety to cover in the back end, and they just try to get a wide receiver in the second round. Maybe there'll be a run that I'm not seeing, and I wouldn't be surprised by that because, like I mentioned, but we're going to keep them on the defensive side. The Dallas Cowboys, they get tight end Dalton Kincaid to add to that pass offense. And the rule is you have to have a tight end named Dalton in Dallas. So
apparently,
I'm not the first one to make that joke, but I will repeat it. Pick 27, Buffalo Bills. They get wide receiver Zay Flowers out of Boston College. He gets to stay in the Northeast. Some people have him as the top wide receiver. He's just a little undersized, but in today's age, being undersized isn't always a bad thing. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. So Zay Flowers, I think, would be a great fit in Buffalo. The Cincinnati Bengals take a no-brainer pick here with Jamar Gibbs. If he makes it this far with the pending investigation into Joe Mixon, him being near the end of his contract, getting a running back here, Jamar Gibbs makes a ton of sense for Cincinnati. I'll give you a chance to chime in.
I like everything you went with there. Cincinnati is one of the more interesting picks in the first round for me because they could just go with a Jamar Gibbs. You might see Joe Mixon moving on to somewhere else. There's also been the whispers of T. Higgins not sticking around in Cincinnati forever. And if that's the case, you might see them take a wide receiver, move T. Higgins, and I don't know what the kind of draft capital they could get from that. They might even be moving up in the first round if that's the case, but that's something to keep an eye on.
And then I have Saints. They take Emmanuel Forbes, the cornerback out of Mississippi State. They're just another team just adding top talent. He's one of the top players on the board. Your Philadelphia Eagles are back on the clock with the 30th pick, and they get their tackle, Anton Harris, out of Oklahoma. So, like we mentioned back all the way at the beginning when they were at pick 10, they were hoping for Paris Johnson. They took the splash guy in Bijan Robinson, and then they follow that up with their tackle to end the draft. And I think Eagles fans would be pretty happy with this, even though you don't take running backs. But how would you feel with the Bijan Robinson, Anton Harris?
A lot of Eagles fans are viewing pick 10 as a bonus pick per se because they still have their pick 30. And that was the pick that like you said, last year, they traded down with the Saints to pick it up as an insurance policy for Jalen Hurts. So the fact that you let your starting running back walk going to get there, I think that'd be totally fine. It's not my personal favorite pick, but I'm not opposed to it. And then going and getting either a defense or an offensive lineman as the other pick is, patented Eagles. So the fact that you can grab a tackle, most likely give him a shot at guard to start with, have your offensive line locked up for the future, that is exactly what I would expect to see.
All right, and that leaves the Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs, on the clock. And I did bait trading them out of the draft, but I didn't. I went with them taking Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver out of TCU. I think wide receiver makes a ton of sense there. I think if Zay Flowers is still there, he's a no-brainer for them. I think Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee. He didn't go in the first round, but he's another guy I think could sneak into the end of the first round here. But I went with Quentin Johnson because he's, the consensus one of the top guys. But there's definitely some options there. So that rounds out the mock draft. George, any big takeaways over the whole thing?
The top 10 picks are going to give us an idea of how the draft is going to go. A lot of it with how fast the quarterbacks come off the board and what quarterbacks come off the board first. Because there's been a lot of anonymous sources out there throwing out a lot of shade on different guys, pumping up these guys, knocking down others. And I'm interested to see if it ends up falling more towards what we're seeing mock drafts coming out now, or if it's going to be more like what we saw mock drafts 2-3 weeks ago. Because a lot has changed. I think, Cody, you were leaning a little bit more towards what we've been hearing recently, but you still have some other things in there where you're kind of like, I don't think this is changing. I think this is a bit of an overhype. So you're kind of in the middle, but you're leaning more towards a lot of the new things we're hearing. And I think that's how it's going to fall on draft night too.
And let's be honest, if you listen to this on Wednesday and you shoot us a DM, I might say, yeah, that was not a smart pick. I think they're going here now because a lot of things will change between now and Thursday night when the draft kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern. For all those that celebrate draft day, then it continues on Friday and moves into Saturday. Unfortunately, I have a wedding to go. Not unfortunately, Katie, I'm so sorry. I'm definitely looking forward to your wedding. I have a wedding to go to on Friday night, which I am kind of glad the Packers didn't get both 42 and 43. Like I'm not going to miss 3 picks and 4 selections. But I'll be back for Saturday. Check it out. So like George mentioned, jump in the Discord, Chat with us on all our DMs, social medias at the Couch GMs. As always, we love doing these podcasts. We're sorry if the video or audio sounds a little bit different. We're going through some trials on what our new podcast setup would be. Just trying to figure out some better things, better ways to get our content out to you guys. As always, thank you for listening. I'm Cody Roadcap. That is George Kerth, and we will see you all next week. Goodbye, choo-choo.